the wife of a multimillionaire called the Waitress Illiterate. But what happened next silenced the entire room permanently. The impeccably manicured index finger of Lauren Vanderpool pointed directly at her face, in front of the entire dining table, in front of the 4 elite partners of the corporate consortium, their heavily perfumed and meticulously dressed wives, and the terrified sommelier who stood frozen holding a bottle of vintage wine, unsure whether to pour it into the crystal glasses or turn around and run away as fast as he could. Can you read? Or is it that in whatever backward town you came from, they simply did not have a school? Lauren said, without lowering her voice, without a single shred of shame, hesitation, or basic human decency. Valerie Sterling held the heavy leather-bound menu with both of her hands, gripping it so tightly that the tips of her fingers turned completely white from the immense pressure she was applying. She counted to 3 in her head, took a deep, steadying breath, and absolutely said nothing at all to the wealthy woman insulting her. The prestigious restaurant, Celestial 34, occupied the breathtaking top floor of a towering glass skyscraper in the heart of Manhattan, offering sweeping views of the city. It was certainly not the kind of establishment where a person could simply walk in off the street without a reservation made weeks in advance, nor was it the kind of place where a patron would ever expect to pay less than $400 per person for a simple meal. The tables were draped in imported Belgian linen tablecloths. The delicate crystal wine glasses cost $90 apiece, and the exclusive tasting menu, which consisted of 9 distinct courses with wine pairings included, was priced at exactly $680 per head. And on this particular night, the highly coveted table at the back, the one that offered the most unobstructed panoramic view of the glowing metropolis, had been reserved with 3 weeks of strict anticipation by Richard Vanderpool, the distinguished general director of Vanderpool and Associates Wine Importers. This highly successful corporate enterprise was currently valued at roughly $4,200,000 and boasted 31 years of solid presence in the competitive national market. Valerie had been quietly and efficiently working at this high-end restaurant for exactly 18 months, having arrived in October, with nothing but a small worn suitcase and a manila envelope filled with glowing letters of recommendation that no one had bothered to ask for, but which she had proudly brought anyway. Eleanor, the seasoned and perceptive general manager, had hired her that very same afternoon, immediately recognizing her punctual nature, her absolute discretion, and her uncanny photographic memory for complex culinary orders that consistently left all of her fellow co-workers staring with their mouths wide open. Valerie never had to write anything down on a notepad. She never once confused a complicated order. She habitually arrived 10 minutes before her scheduled shift began, and she invariably stayed 10 minutes after her shift ended, without anyone ever having to ask her to do so. That specific evening fate had decided to assign her to the prominent table at the back of the elegant dining room. Richard Vanderpool, 42 years old, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, with polished silver cufflinks gleaming under the ambient lights, arrived first, alongside his distinguished corporate partners. He warmly greeted them all with that inherent, effortless facility possessed exclusively by men who have never genuinely had to worry about a single hardship in their entire privileged lives. Valerie approached with a polite demeanor, smoothly took their preliminary orders for the evening's appetizers, and expertly recommended the house sparkling wine to perfectly begin their lavish culinary experience. She smiled with the exact measured amount of professional courtesy required of her position, and everything seemed to be progressing flawlessly. Lauren Vanderpool arrived precisely 20 minutes later, striding into the hushed restaurant with the overwhelming, demanding energy of a person who desperately needs absolutely everyone in the vicinity to acknowledge her grand entrance. Her expensive designer heels echoed loudly against the pristine marble floors, and she carelessly dropped her creamy cashmere winter coat over the extended arm of the floor assistant without so much as glancing in his direction. She carried a genuine crocodile skin luxury handbag that retailed for an astonishing $85,000, a fact Valerie learned almost immediately, not because she was a connoisseur of high-end fashion accessories, but because Lauren continuously made a point of mentioning its exorbitant price tag throughout the first half of the lavish dinner. She aggressively took her seat, completely ignored Valerie's polite evening greeting, and glared down at the meticulously crafted menu as if simply reading the printed words was doing the entire establishment an immense unearned favor. "I want the flounder," she loudly demanded, waving her hand dismissively in the air. "Without any capers, without any butter, without any sauce of any kind, just the plain fish, and make sure it is thoroughly cooked. Do not come back to me with any of that medium-rare nonsense, because I know exactly how I like my food prepared." "Certainly, madam," Valerie replied with unfailing politeness. "Do you have any additional dietary restrictions or specific allergies that I should carefully note for the kitchen staff?" Lauren glared up at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust, as if the humble waitress had just uttered the most absurd, offensive statement she had ever heard in her entire life. "An allergy? What kind of idiotic question is that to ask someone like me?" Valerie maintained her polite composure and gently explained, "It is simply the standard protocol of the restaurant, madam, to guarantee your dining experience is flawless." Lauren scoffed loudly. "My dining experience is guaranteed by you not wasting my valuable time with such idiotic, pointless questions." Valerie simply nodded diligently, noted the specific requests in her mind, smiled her professional smile, and quietly walked away toward the bustling kitchen. The real, undeniable problem ultimately arose during the heavily anticipated third course of the evening's extravagant tasting menu. Valerie gracefully approached the large table carrying the elegant cheese service plates, which featured a carefully curated selection of 4 European varieties presented on a rich walnut wood board, accompanied by local artisanal honey and candied pecans. As she delicately placed the beautiful wooden board directly in front of Lauren, the wealthy woman immediately scowled and sharply asked what this garbage was supposed to be. Valerie calmly explained that it was the third-course cheese selection detailing the specific varieties. But Lauren violently interrupted, falsely claiming she had never ordered such a thing, and accusing Valerie of implying she could not understand what she read. The surrounding conversations at the table instantly dropped in volume, as Lauren delivered her devastating, humiliating insult about Valerie coming from a backward town without a school, completely humiliating her in front of everyone. Valerie simply left the board on the table, walked back to the kitchen without a single tremor in her steady hands, and leaned against the cold steel wall out of sight. That night, when Valerie collected the payment of $1,540, plus the mandatory 10% service charge, she found a crumpled $2 bill folded in 4 hidden underneath Lauren's crystal glass, which she quietly placed in her apron pocket to never forget the insult. Valerie Sterling had in a previous, vastly different life been the exact kind of brilliant, meticulous woman who consistently highlighted her massive academic textbooks using 2 distinct colors of ink. She reliably used blue ink for the fundamentally important concepts and bright red ink for the vital details she absolutely never wanted to forget under any circumstances. But that remarkably ambitious woman had seemingly vanished 8 years ago, and she tragically had not departed from this world completely alone. Her grueling shift at the restaurant finally concluded at exactly 1 o'clock in the morning. Valerie quietly retrieved her heavy winter jacket from her assigned metal locker, exited through the dimly lit service door located in the back alley, and began her long, exhausting walk down the freezing Manhattan streets toward the bustling subway station. The biting November wind smelled strongly of lingering city exhaust, frozen asphalt, and the sweet, comforting scent of roasted nuts wafting from a small, battered vendor cart stationed faithfully on the corner of the busy avenue. She stopped and purchased a small, warm pretzel, not necessarily because her stomach was aching with hunger, but entirely because the elderly man operating the small cart had generously lent her his only umbrella on a bitterly rainy Tuesday evening back in March, without ever asking for a single thing in return. Ever since that simple act of kindness, Valerie religiously made sure to buy something from him every single night on her way back home to Queens. She sat down heavily on the cold wooden bench inside the drafty subway station, slowly unwrapped her warm pretzel, and briefly allowed her tired mind to wander back to the arrogant image of Lauren Vanderpool and her aggressively pointing index finger. However, she consciously refused to dwell on that infuriating memory for very long, strictly reminding herself that it was a complete waste of her precious mental energy to focus on a cruel person who genuinely did not deserve even a fraction of her attention. Instead, she deliberately shifted her thoughts toward a quiet, sunlit library, specifically the Grand Architectural Library of Columbia University, located on the 4th floor of the historic Economics Building. She vividly remembered her favorite sturdy wooden desk, situated perfectly by the large right-side window that directly overlooked the lush green campus gardens, a spot she always claimed because it received brilliant natural sunlight until exactly 5 o'clock in the afternoon, sparing her eyes from unnecessary strain. She remembered the massive, groundbreaking academic thesis she had been tirelessly writing concerning complex foreign trade policies within emerging Latin American markets. The dense document consisted of 142 incredibly detailed pages, originally written meticulously, by hand, subsequently typed on a noisy mechanical typewriter, and finally transferred to a modern computer. It represented 4 grueling years of relentless academic labor, earning her the deep respect of her senior academic advisor, who frequently referred to her publicly as the single most rigorous, dedicated student he had ever had the distinct privilege of teaching in his entire 20 years of university instruction. That brilliant, unstoppable academic force was exactly who she had been before she unfortunately crossed paths with a man named Marcus Foster. Marcus Foster had been 36 years old at that fateful time, operating confidently as a highly ambitious junior partner at a prestigious financial consulting firm located in the financial district. She had initially met him during an extensive multi-day academic conference entirely dedicated to international commercial treaties and economic expansion strategies. He immediately told her with utterly convincing sincerity that she was unquestionably the most fiercely intelligent, capable person he had encountered in a very long time. He promised her a brilliant, limitless future, whispering countless beautiful, reassuring things into her ear, until he ultimately convinced her to sign the highly complex partnership agreement for the newly formed corporate entity known as Vanderpool and Associates. Yes, it was the exact same highly profitable importing company owned by Richard Vanderpool, the very same wealthy man wearing the expensive navy blue suit she had served dinner to earlier that evening. The original comprehensive legal contract consisted of 12 dense pages of terminology and 3 highly specific technical annexes. Valerie, being naturally meticulous, read every single word of the massive document twice. It was a completely solid, inherently fair, and legally binding agreement. Her full name clearly appeared in the 4th clause, explicitly designating her as a minority founding partner with a guaranteed 17% ownership stake, which directly corresponded to her immense contribution of vital intellectual capital. That contribution was the exhaustive, brilliant market analysis she alone had single-handedly developed over the course of an entire agonizing year, serving as the absolute foundational blueprint for the company's aggressive and highly successful national expansion model. At that specific moment in time, her intellectual property was officially and legally valued at exactly $71,400. She signed the heavy, important document with immense pride. However, a mere 6 months later, Marcus casually presented her with a brand new, vastly different legal document, casually dismissing it as a routine amendment to the original contract, simply a minor technical adjustment required by a fussy notary public. She truly intended to read that document carefully as well, but she had been suffering from a devastating severe flu that had relentlessly plagued her for 10 long days, leaving her head feeling completely stuffed with thick, heavy cotton. Perhaps because of that intense, blinding sickness, she tragically failed to see the devastating reality she absolutely should have noticed. Her name was entirely missing from the crucial fourth clause. She did not discover this horrifying, life-altering truth until exactly 2 years later, when she finally attempted to review the official status of her financial shares, only to learn that officially, legally, she had never actually been a partner in anything at all. By that devastating time, Marcus had already completely vanished, running off with another younger woman, stealing the precious analysis, and completely taking the 4 years of her life that she had blindly given him, naively believing they were building a beautiful shared future together. The roaring subway train finally arrived, pulling Valerie forcefully out of her painful, distant memories. She tossed her wrapper into the nearby trash bin, stepped onto the crowded train car, and sat down quietly next to the dark, smudged window. The faint, ghostly reflection of her tired face stared back at her from the dark glass, revealing a 34-year-old woman with profoundly exhausted eyes and her hair pulled tightly back with the exact same cheap elastic band she had worn all week. "Yes, Mrs. Vanderpool," she whispered softly to her own reflection, "I can read complex financial balances, intricate commercial contracts, and international trade agreements, but I am not going to tell anyone that absolute truth just yet." The following morning, Valerie arrived at Restaurant Celestial 34, precisely at 11 o'clock, a full hour before her scheduled afternoon shift was meant to begin. Eleanor, the sharp-eyed manager, immediately spotted her walking through the busy service entrance and gave her a subtle but urgent nod, gesturing silently toward the small, cramped administrative office located at the very back of the chaotic kitchen. "Close the heavy wooden door," Eleanor instructed her in a low, serious tone. Valerie quietly shut the door, sealing them off from the clattering noises of the prep cooks. Eleanor was a formidable, unapologetic woman of 61 years of age, possessing wide, sturdy hips and the distinctively raspy, textured voice of someone who had relentlessly smoked heavy cigarettes for 20 consecutive years before abruptly quitting cold turkey one random Tuesday without offering a single word of explanation to anyone. She had proudly worked in the unforgiving, high-stress restaurant industry for exactly 31 years, managing temperamental kitchens. She had successfully collaborated with 4 incredibly demanding Michelin-starred executive chefs and had ruthlessly fired 2 of them without even blinking an eye. She was certainly not the kind of woman who ever beat around the bush or avoided a difficult, uncomfortable conversation. The immensely wealthy Mrs. Vanderpool actually had the absolute audacity to call this morning, Eleanor stated bluntly, leaning back against her cluttered wooden desk. She specifically demanded that you be entirely removed from the dining room floor when they return for their next reservation, which they have officially booked for this coming Friday evening. Valerie did not show a single ounce of surprise on her tired face. "And what exactly did you tell her in response?" she asked calmly. Eleanor crossed her arms tightly over her chest. "I firmly informed her that the highly trained staff of this prestigious restaurant is never assigned or reassigned based purely on the arbitrary, vindictive whims of our entitled clients. And then I simply hung up the telephone on her." Valerie looked at her older boss with genuine, profound gratitude. "Thank you so much," Valerie said softly. "Do not thank me just yet," Eleanor quickly replied, holding up a warning hand. You can thank me later if this entire miserable situation does not somehow manage to get significantly uglier." Eleanor paused for a long moment, studying Valerie's calm demeanor. "Do you have any idea who exactly that woman's influential husband is? Richard Vanderpool." Valerie answered instantly without a single second of hesitation. "The powerful general director of Vanderpool and Associates Wine Importers." Eleanor deeply furrowed her brow, clearly caught completely off guard by the absolute certainty and lack of hesitation in Valerie's swift response. "Exactly," Eleanor said slowly, her eyes narrowing slightly in suspicion. "Do you somehow know him personally?" Valerie shook her head slightly. "I am intimately familiar with the massive company he successfully runs. They possess extensive high-level contacts within the National Restaurant Association. If they truly desired to do so, they could easily cause massive, devastating problems for this particular establishment." Valerie slowly raised her dark eyes to meet Eleanor's steady gaze. "And you already blatantly told them no?" Eleanor studied her employee for a long, silent moment, analyzing the hidden depths she suddenly sensed. Then she nodded slowly, like a weary general, confirming a highly dangerous tactical decision she had already finalized in her mind. "Go get changed into your clean uniform," Eleanor finally commanded. "We have a massive lunch service starting very soon." Friday evening eventually arrived with a heavy unspoken tension hanging thick in the restaurant's air. Richard Vanderpool arrived completely alone this time without his usual corporate partners, and most importantly, without his demanding mother Lauren. He quietly sat down at the exact same prestigious table situated in the very back of the room, and simply requested a glass of sparkling mineral water while he waited. Valerie approached him and dutifully served him, utilizing the exact same flawless professional protocol she employed with every other guest, consciously choosing neither to give him any special unwarranted recognition nor to blatantly ignore his significant presence. "May I safely ask you a somewhat personal question?" Richard suddenly asked her in a low voice when she approached the table to gracefully remove his empty water glass. "It is regarding the unfortunate incident that occurred the other evening." He paused awkwardly, deliberately staring down at the pristine white tablecloth instead of looking directly into her eyes. "What my mother loudly said to you in front of everyone was completely out of line, and the fact that I cowardly said absolutely nothing to defend you in that moment was equally wrong." Valerie stood perfectly still, effortlessly holding the delicate crystal glass in her steady hand. "An apology is absolutely not necessary, sir," she replied with a completely neutral tone. "Yes, it absolutely is," Richard insisted, finally looking up at her face. "You are completely forgiven," Valerie stated plainly. "However, I am most certainly not the person in this situation who genuinely needs the apology." She looked deeply into his eyes for a single fleeting second, revealing just a tiny fraction of the immense hidden history she carried inside her. "I know," she whispered softly, and then she swiftly turned around and confidently walked away. Richard remained completely frozen in his expensive chair, staring blankly out the massive glass window at the sprawling, illuminated city stretching out in the background. Millions of tiny, busy people were rapidly moving far below him, yet he was entirely consumed by the deeply uncomfortable, sinking sensation that this seemingly humble waitress definitively knew something incredibly important that he had not yet discovered. Back in the chaotic kitchen, Eleanor was rapidly finishing the daily inventory checks when she asked Valerie without even bothering to look up from her clipboard, "The wealthy son of Mrs. Vanderpool just offered you an apology, didn't he?" "Yes, he did," Valerie confirmed quietly. "And what exactly did you do in response?" Eleanor pressed. "I simply told him that he was forgiven." Eleanor loudly clicked her tongue in annoyance. My dear girl, that clever man was not actually apologizing to you. He was quietly, meticulously studying you to see how you would react. Valerie remained completely silent for a moment before finally speaking. And you need to be incredibly careful, Eleanor warned her sharply. People who study you in complete silence always have a very dangerous hidden motive. Valerie nodded slowly, picked up her heavy serving tray, and walked back out into the bustling dining room. However, somewhere deep down inside her chest, something massive that had been dormant for 8 incredibly long years had finally shifted, acting exactly like the sensitive needle of a compass, finally locking onto true north. It was not a feeling of foolish hope. Not yet. It was something far more dangerous and far more powerful than simple hope. It was absolute, unwavering attention to the unfolding situation. Meanwhile, Lauren had just sent a vicious message to her wealthy friends' group chat, including a sneaky photograph of Valerie's back, asking exactly how she could completely destroy this particular waitress's humble life. Valerie absolutely did not respond to the escalating situation with immediate anger or obvious panic, not necessarily because she did not know exactly what to say, but because she had learned through extremely painful, hard-hitting lessons over the past long years that arrogant people who desperately need to humiliate others in public have one very specific, fatal weakness. They genuinely have absolutely no idea what to do when their intended victim simply refuses to respond to their vile provocations. The profound, heavy silence destabilizes their fragile egos far more effectively than any screaming match ever could. Saturday morning dawned bleak and completely overcast across the sprawling expanse of Manhattan. Valerie finally exited the towering restaurant building at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, having survived another grueling, chaotic lunch service, her aching feet throbbing with pain and the thick, greasy smell of the industrial kitchen deeply embedded within her dark hair. She tightly zipped up her worn winter jacket against the biting cold, crossed the busy avenue, and confidently headed straight toward her regular subway entrance. It was exactly at that moment that she unexpectedly saw him waiting. Richard Vanderpool was casually leaning against the sleek hood of a black Audi, parked exactly half a block away from the restaurant's discreet service doors. He was absolutely not speaking on his expensive mobile phone, nor was he pretending to look in another direction. He was staring directly, intensely, at the exact doorway where she was scheduled to emerge, looking as if he knew the precise minute her long shift officially concluded. Valerie did not instinctively slow her steady pace, nor did she attempt to change her established direction. She walked purposefully toward him as if encountering a wealthy corporate director on a random street corner was the most natural, ordinary occurrence in the entire world. "You were intentionally waiting for me," she stated plainly, when she finally reached his immediate location. Richard pushed himself off the expensive luxury vehicle. Standing closely in the harsh daylight, completely stripped of his formal dinner suit, and wearing only a dark casual jacket, he appeared surprisingly younger, and perhaps, strangely significantly, more honest. "Yes, I was," he admitted, freely making absolutely no attempt to offer a polite apology for his intrusive presence. Valerie stared directly into his tired eyes. For what possible reason? He slowly reached his hand deep into his dark jacket pocket and carefully pulled out his mobile phone. He unlocked the bright screen and silently held it up for her to clearly see. It was a crisp, clear screenshot of the exclusive WhatsApp group chat. She instantly recognized Lauren's vile, hateful message, the sneaky, unauthorized photograph of Valerie's back the dozen heart reactions, and the cruel laughing emojis posted by the wealthy wives. "How exactly did you get your hands on this?" Valerie asked calmly, intentionally refusing to take the physical phone from his extended hand. "Someone within that specific group chat forwarded it to me directly," Richard answered softly. "Who specifically?" Valerie demanded. "That particular detail does not genuinely matter right now," he replied. "It absolutely matters to me," she countered instantly. Richard slowly lowered the device, studying her intensely for a long moment, visibly evaluating exactly how much sensitive information he should willingly reveal to her. "Someone who has been profoundly uncomfortable with exactly how my overbearing mother casually conducts her personal affairs for a very long time," he finally confessed, pausing briefly before adding, "This is certainly not the very first time she has attempted to ruthlessly destroy someone's quiet life like this." Valerie remained completely silent. The freezing city wind blew a discarded newspaper across the concrete sidewalk. "What exactly do you want from me?" she asked him at last. "Absolutely nothing," Richard replied, and surprisingly he stated it in a tone that actually sounded incredibly truthful. "I genuinely only wanted you to be fully aware of this escalating situation, so that you could properly prepare and do whatever it is you absolutely need to do to protect yourself." Valerie raised an eyebrow. "And what if I decide that I do not need to do anything at all?" Richard carefully studied her face. Utilizing that exact same intense, searching gaze he had displayed the previous night inside the elegant restaurant, deeply looking as if he strongly suspected there was a massive hidden truth completely buried underneath her simple words, and he was desperately trying to decipher the complex puzzle. "Then I suppose you should simply do nothing," he finally conceded. They stood together in complete tense silence for another long moment. "May I ask you a serious question?" Valerie suddenly inquired. "Yes," he nodded. "Exactly how much time have you spent personally managing your father's massive corporate enterprise?" Richard blinked rapidly, clearly completely thrown off by her incredibly specific, unexpected business question. 8 years, he answered cautiously. "Why do you ask?" Valerie nodded her head very slowly, moving exactly like a highly intelligent detective who has just had a crucial, long-held suspicion definitively confirmed. "For absolutely no reason at all," she stated quietly, and immediately turned around to walk away. "Miss Sterling!" Richard called out urgently. She stopped her forward movement but deliberately did not turn around to face him right away. "How exactly do you know my actual last name?" she asked him without turning. "I politely asked your manager," he replied quickly. "Eleanor absolutely never gives out the personal information of her dedicated staff to anyone," Valerie countered coldly. A heavy second of uncomfortable silence passed between them. "You are completely right," Richard confessed quietly. "I actually saw your full name printed clearly on the official credit card receipt when I personally paid for my dinner last night." Valerie finally turned her body around very slowly and looked him directly, piercingly in the eyes. "That statement is also absolutely not true," she told him firmly, and then she quickly walked away, leaving him standing alone on the freezing sidewalk. Richard remained completely frozen, standing next to his expensive black Audi, keeping his cold hands shoved deep inside his pockets, quietly watching her rapidly disappear around the busy corner without turning her dark head back to look at him even a single time. Deep inside his chest, an incredibly uncomfortable, unnamed sensation desperately began to twist and turn. It was absolutely not guilt, but rather something far closer to the terrifying, undeniable recognition that this humble waitress somehow knew massive, dangerous secrets that he had never spoken aloud, and she had miraculously arrived at this deeply hidden knowledge entirely on her own. He quickly got into his car, but right before starting the powerful engine, he forcefully dialed a private phone number. "I absolutely need you to extensively review something immediately," he demanded into the phone the exact second the person on the other end answered. The original legal constitution contracts of the company, the incredibly specific ones from the year 2016. The person on the other end hesitated. All of them, Richard ordered firmly, and hung up. Meanwhile, Chloe, the old cook, arrived at the restaurant carrying freshly baked peach cobbler, bringing dark rumors that Lauren was aggressively trying to have the restaurant's operating licenses revoked to punish them. The highly anticipated, dread-inducing corporate phone call finally arrived exactly on Monday morning at precisely 10 o'clock. Valerie was quietly sitting inside her tiny, cramped Queens apartment, a miserable room measuring barely 8 square meters, costing her exactly $420 every single month in rent, featuring a terrible shared bathroom down the dark hallway, when the unknown unlisted phone number suddenly flashed brightly across her cracked mobile screen. She intentionally let it ring loudly exactly 3 times before calmly pressing the answer button. "Miss Sterling," a stern, authoritative voice stated. It was a formal administrative male voice, exactly the type of aggressive tone someone intentionally adopts, so that absolutely no one ever questions why they possess authority. "I am officially calling on behalf of the senior corporate management of the Celestial Restaurant Group." Valerie simply answered, "Yes." The man continued swiftly. "The executive director of Human Resources would very much like to formally meet with you today at exactly 12 o'clock in the afternoon, if that is physically possible for you." Valerie stared blankly up at the cracked, peeling ceiling of her tiny bedroom, noting a massive water stain. "Yes," Valerie repeated calmly, showing absolutely no fear. "I will certainly be there." She immediately hung up. The telephone sat heavily on the very edge of her lumpy mattress, and slowly counted all the way to 10. Not because she was terrified, but because she desperately needed to carefully formulate a flawless strategy before making her next move. The powerful executive director of Human Resources for the massive restaurant group was a highly intimidating woman named Rachel Simmons, 48 years old, invariably wearing a sharp-tailored gray suit and sporting short, severe hair. She was exactly the type of fiercely determined woman who had clawed her way to the very top by ruthlessly working twice as hard as her male corporate colleagues. The tense meeting occurred inside a small windowless conference room located on the 2nd floor of the main corporate headquarters building. "Thank you for coming, Miss Sterling." Rachel began opening a remarkably thin, manila folder. "We urgently need to formally discuss a highly disturbing incident that occurred on Tuesday, the 11th of November. CD Fitin Huatuan," Rachel explained that they had received a formal aggressive complaint directly from Lauren Vanderpool alleging highly inappropriate, disrespectful behavior from Valerie. Valerie calmly but firmly denied ever raising her voice or acting unprofessionally, directly suggesting they pull the restaurant's security camera footage to verify her claims. Rachel completely ignored this perfectly logical suggestion, looking down at her files and casually mentioning a highly suspicious, completely unscheduled inspection suddenly ordered by the National Restaurant Association. Rachel claimed it was a random check, but strongly implied that Valerie's continued presence on the dining room floor was a massive liability, officially suggesting a temporary reassignment to another less visible position. Valerie instantly knew this was a classic corporate tactic to force an unwanted employee to resign quietly. She asked if Eleanor knew about this decision. Rachel smoothly replied that Eleanor's strong objections had been completely ignored. Valerie simply nodded, fully understanding the dire situation, thanked Rachel for her time, and walked straight out of the towering corporate building into the freezing New York air. Standing on the cold concrete sidewalk, Valerie pulled out her phone and forcefully dialed a number she had absolutely not called in exactly 3 agonizing years. After waiting for 4 long rings, a sharp, intelligent female voice finally answered. "Professor Fuller." Valerie said clearly, "This is Valerie Sterling." A heavy pause followed. "I desperately need to speak with you immediately. It is extremely urgent, but it is not quite an emergency just yet." Irene Fuller was a brilliant, highly respected attorney who operated out of a cluttered second-floor office located in Brooklyn, a space completely filled with towering, chaotic stacks of heavy law books. She had proudly served as Valerie's incredibly demanding commercial law professor during her fourth grueling semester at Columbia University. She was the absolute only professor who had truly taught Valerie how to meticulously read a complex legal contract, not simply as a boring standard document, but as a highly strategic, dangerous battlefield. They met precisely at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Valerie carefully explained everything to her former professor without a single ounce of unnecessary drama, providing exact dates, specific names, and massive financial figures. Irene listened with extreme, unwavering focus, keeping her elbows firmly planted on her cluttered wooden desk. When Valerie finally finished detailing the brutal theft of her intellectual property valued at exactly $71,400, Irene remained completely silent for 10 long seconds. "The fraudulent amendment contract that you signed back in 2016. Irene finally said, "Do you possess a physical copy of it?" Valerie shook her head. Marcus completely controlled all the physical documents. However, I vividly remember the specific notary public where it was officially signed. Valerie closed her tired eyes, perfectly recalling the crucial memory. It was Notary Public Office number 42. The official notary was a man named Arthur Sterling. I only memorized his specific name because I found it highly amusing that he happened to share my exact same last name. Irene's sharp eyes practically gleamed with brilliant legal strategy. "Official notary records are fully public," she explained rapidly. "I can officially request a certified legal copy of the absolute original document. If your name was magically removed without your consent, we have a massive case for absolute legal nullity." Irene warned that the complex legal process could easily take 2 full weeks just to begin, and Valerie confessed that she absolutely did not have that much time, because the restaurant corporation was actively trying to fire her right now. Irene simply told her to hold her ground and survive the work pressure while she furiously handled the complicated legal assault. Later that same night, Valerie visited her elderly grandfather Arthur, who was exactly 84 years old and lived in a tiny, cramped room that constantly smelled of strong herbal liniment and sweet, freshly baked bread. She brought him his favorite warm milk and sweet pastries. They sat quietly together at his small table. Valerie admitted she was deeply tired, not entirely from her physically demanding restaurant job, but from the massive, crushing weight of the profound injustice she had been silently carrying completely alone for 8 long years. Her wise grandfather gently reminded her of the incredibly powerful, resilient women in their humble family line, explicitly telling her that whatever had been brutally stolen from her absolutely never stopped being rightfully hers, giving her the final surge of strength she desperately needed to fight back. Valerie's investigation took a decisive turn when Irene Fuller uncovered evidence that the 2016 amendment removing Valerie's 17% ownership stake had been forged. The original 2014 notarized contract clearly listed Valerie as a shareholder, while the later amendment contained a fake signature and a fraudulent notary stamp from an office whose notary had died the previous year. Irene concluded that the theft was a deliberate criminal conspiracy requiring inside assistance, strongly implicating Lauren Vanderpool alongside Marcus Foster. Soon afterward, Richard Vanderpool privately admitted that he had unknowingly signed documents during the company takeover and had only recently discovered Valerie's rightful ownership. Valerie made it clear that she wanted nothing except the full restoration of what legally belonged to her. Realizing the truth was closing in, Lauren attempted to silence Valerie by offering her a $15,000 bribe during a private meeting at an exclusive cafe. Valerie rejected the offer, confronted Lauren about Marcus Foster's involvement, and secretly recorded the entire conversation as evidence. At the emergency partners meeting, Irene presented the authentic contracts, the handwriting experts' findings, proof that the notarization was impossible, and the recording of Lauren's bribery attempt. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the partners unanimously accepted Valerie's demand for the immediate return of her 17% ownership stake, along with financial compensation reflecting 8 years of corporate growth totaling $983,000, while Lauren fled the meeting in disgrace. 3 weeks later, Valerie resigned from the restaurant after ensuring her replacement was trained and received heartfelt farewells from her co-workers. She shared her victory with her grandfather, Arthur, and after several more months, the legal process concluded the compensation was paid. Marcus Foster was prosecuted, and Lauren was forced to testify against him. Richard quietly covered the company's legal expenses, while Valerie opened a new office in Brooklyn, displaying an old $2 bill as a reminder that underestimating a quiet, determined person can be an extraordinarily costly mistake. Arthur moved into their new home, and Valerie finally found peace, embracing the lesson that patience, integrity, and steadfast commitment to truth ultimately overcome arrogance, deception, and humiliation.